This story is titled, "Found Out My Perfect Boyfriend Has Been Using Our Relationship Timeline to Write a Successful Dating Advice Blog, but he's listed every red flag as a success strategy." I'm still shaking as I type this. You know that feeling when your entire reality crumbles and you realize everything you believed in was just an elaborate lie? That's where I am right now. My boyfriend didn't just betray my trust. He turned our entire relationship into a twisted experiment and made money off it. Every intimate moment, every vulnerable confession, every tear I shed, it was all just content for his blog. But the worst part? He's been teaching other guys how to manipulate women, using our relationship as a template. God, I feel so stupid. How did I not see this coming? Let me introduce myself and the key players in this nightmare. I'm Sarah, 24, a kindergarten teacher who, until yesterday, thought I had found my soulmate in James, 26. We met at my best friend Lily's housewarming party 18 months ago. Lily, 24, works with James at a marketing agency, which, looking back now, explains so much about his expertise in spinning narratives. Then there's James's roommate and business partner, Mark, 27, who I always thought was a bit odd but harmless. Turns out, he's been helping James run this whole operation from the beginning. The final person you need to know about is my sister, Hannah, 28, who thankfully helped me uncover this whole mess, though I wish she hadn't had to. Before this revelation, my life felt like a romantic comedy. I was the awkward but loving teacher who somehow landed the charming marketing executive. Our relationship seemed perfect, the kind that made other couples jealous. James always knew exactly what to say, exactly when to say it, and exactly how to handle any situation. Now I understand why he had been studying relationship psychology and dating strategies for years, using them to craft his online persona as a dating guru. You want to know the craziest part? Our first meeting wasn't even a coincidence. Lily later confessed that James had seen my pictures on her social media months before the party and had specifically asked to be introduced to me. He chose me. He targeted me. Why? Because, according to his blog, I fit the perfect profile for his case study, his words, not mine. A caring profession, close family ties, and what he calls a naturally trusting disposition. I was the ideal subject to prove his theories about relationship manipulation worked. Every milestone in our relationship, every sweet gesture, every seemingly spontaneous romantic moment, it was all meticulously planned and documented. But here's where it gets really twisted. While I was falling deeper in love, James was writing detailed blog posts about how to handle women like me. He turned our story into a step-by-step guide for manipulative men, complete with psychological tactics and timing strategies. You're probably wondering how I discovered all this. Well, that's where the story really begins to get interesting. It started with a simple Pinterest notification on my sister Hannah's phone. She was planning her wedding and had been collecting ideas for months. That morning, she was scrolling through relationship advice articles when she stumbled across a blog post titled "How to Make Her Think the Proposal Was Her Idea." The writing style seemed oddly familiar, so she kept reading. The more she read, the sicker she felt. The post detailed a strategy about leaving wedding magazines around, casually mentioning friends' engagements, and orchestrating spontaneous visits to jewelry stores, exactly what James had been doing with me for the past 2 months. But it wasn't just the strategy that caught her attention. The blogger described his girlfriend's reactions in detail, including an incident where I had tearfully told James about finding a wedding magazine he'd accidentally left at my apartment. That's right, my private, emotional moment, something I thought was intimate and special between us, was being used as a teaching moment for other men. The post even included my exact words, though thankfully not my name, when she cries and says she feels silly for looking at wedding dresses. Already you've hit the sweet spot. She's now convinced herself that she's the one pushing the relationship forward. I remember that moment so clearly. I had felt vulnerable and embarrassed, and James had been so understanding, so gentle. He'd held me and told me it was perfectly natural to think about the future. Now I realize he had probably gone home that night and gleefully typed up my reaction for his blog, analyzing my emotions like I was some kind of lab rat. My sister kept digging. The blog went back 18 months, exactly when James and I had started dating. Every major moment in our relationship was there, twisted into manipulative lessons for his followers. Our first fight? A post about how to turn her anger into guilt. That time I was insecure about a new coworker at his office, using jealousy to strengthen her attachment. But the post that broke me? Why dating a kindergarten teacher is the perfect training ground. James explained how women in nurturing professions are naturally more forgiving and prone to see the best in people. He praised my profession not for its value or the care it requires, but for how it made me an ideal target for emotional manipulation. My career, my passion for helping children, was reduced to a convenient personality trait for his dating strategy. The worst part was realizing how calculated every sweet moment had been. Remember how I mentioned James had seen my photos on Lily's social media? His blog had a whole post about choosing targets through mutual friends' social networks. He called it pre-selection strategy, finding the perfect test subject. There was even a checklist of qualities to look for in profile pictures. Apparently, my photos showing me with my kindergarten class and family gatherings marked me as someone with nurturing tendencies and strong family values, perfect for his experiments. My hands were shaking as Hannah showed me everything she found, but among the hurt and betrayal, something else was building inside me. Rage. Pure, clear rage. And with that rage came clarity. James wasn't just going to get away with this. No, I had something much better in mind. You know what's fascinating about teaching kindergarten? You learn that the best lessons come from experience, not lectures. My students understand consequences better when they face them naturally, rather than just being told what's right and wrong. As I sat in my classroom that afternoon, watching my students learn through play, it hit me. James needed to experience exactly what he put me through. My first step was understanding my enemy. I spent that entire weekend reading every single post on his blog, taking notes on his strategies, his thinking patterns, his weaknesses. It was like reading a twisted diary of our relationship, except from the perspective of someone who saw human emotions as buttons to push. The more I read, the more I realized something crucial. James's entire persona, both online and in real life, was built on being in control. He prided himself on never being the vulnerable one. What's that saying about pride coming before a fall? Meanwhile, I kept up appearances. Every time I saw James, the first played my role perfectly. The loving, unsuspecting girlfriend. It wasn't hard. I'd had an excellent teacher in manipulation, after all. I even started leaving my laptop open to wedding Pinterest boards when he came over, watching him smirk to himself, probably mentally drafting his next blog post about how well his strategies were working. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember Lily, my best friend who works with James? Well, she was horrified when I showed her the blog. Turns out, James had been using techniques from his blog on everyone at work to manipulating his way up the corporate ladder. Lily had always thought something felt off about how quickly he'd risen in the company, how he always seemed to take credit for others' work while somehow making them thank him for it. That's when Lily told me something that made my plan click into place. Their company was planning a huge presentation for their biggest client, and James was set to lead it. He'd been bragging about it for weeks, both at work and on his blog, calling it his career-making moment. The presentation was going to be live-streamed to all the company's global offices. It was a big deal. What James didn't know was that I'd started my own writing project. Not a blog, nothing so obvious. Instead, I began documenting every manipulation tactic he used, every lie he told, every way he twisted situations at work to his advantage. Lily helped, gathering stories from their coworkers who'd been stepped on during James's rise to the top. The picture that emerged was far bigger than just our relationship. It was a pattern of calculated emotional manipulation that affected dozens of people. But I wasn't interested in exposing him publicly or creating some big, dramatic scene. No, I had something much more elegant in mind, something that would hit him where it really hurt, his carefully constructed image of control. I also knew something James didn't. His roommate, Mark, wasn't as loyal as he thought. Mark had been getting increasingly uncomfortable with James's blog, especially after seeing how it affected real people. When I approached him, showing him the evidence I'd gathered and explaining my plan, he was surprisingly eager to help. Maybe he was trying to clear his own conscience, or maybe he was just tired of being James's sidekick. Either way, he became an unexpected ally. As the day of the big presentation approached, I could see James getting more and more confident. His blog posts became increasingly arrogant, full of advice about maintaining frame and controlling the room. He had no idea that his perfectly constructed world was about to unravel, thread by carefully pulled thread. The day of James's big presentation arrived. The conference room was packed with executives. The live stream was set up to broadcast to offices worldwide, and James was practically glowing with self-importance. I was there too. He had insisted I come to support him, probably planning to write a blog post later about how to use career success to deepen relationship control. What he didn't know was that Lily had helped me prepare something special for the presentation's Q&A session. She had quietly arranged for me to ask the first question after his presentation. James had spent weeks rehearsing, making sure every slide was perfect, every transition smooth. He even bragged on his blog about how this presentation would prove his theories about dominating professional spaces. The presentation itself went exactly as he planned. James was charismatic, confident, taking credit for his team's work while making it sound like he was praising them. I watched the faces of his coworkers, now able to recognize the subtle flashes of frustration they quickly hid. I wasn't the only one he'd been manipulating. Then came the Q&A session. My heart was pounding as I raised my hand, and James, still riding high on his success, eagerly called on me. His face beamed with that familiar, self-satisfied smile, the same one I'd seen countless times when he thought his manipulation was working perfectly. I have a question about your expertise in strategic communication, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Could you explain how your dating advice blog influences your professional approach? The room went completely silent. James's smile froze on his face. Several executives leaned forward in their seats. I'm particularly interested in your post from last week, I continued, pulling out my phone. The one where you explain how you manipulated your way into leading this project by undermining your colleagues, especially Lily's original proposal. Or perhaps you'd like to explain the post where you brag about using your girlfriend that would be me as a test subject for your manipulation techniques. The color drained from James's face. On the wall-mounted screen showing the live stream, I could see people in other offices leaning closer to their cameras. Mark, who was managing the presentation technology, deliberately kept the cameras focused on James's increasingly panicked expression. But I wasn't done. I think our audience would be particularly interested in your strategies for managing upward. The posts where you detail how you manipulated senior management, the ones where you named specific executives and their exploitable weaknesses. Someone in the back of the room pulled up James's blog on their phone. I could hear the growing murmur as people started reading, sharing links, their expressions changing from confusion to disgust. The executives' faces had turned stormy. James started to stammer something about context and professional development, but his carefully crafted facade was crumbling. Lily stood up next. I have copies of all the original project proposals, she announced, showing how James systematically took credit for his team's work while publicly pretending to be modest. She started passing out documents we'd prepared everything meticulously. The most satisfying moment? When James tried to use one of his favorite manipulation tactics, turning the situation around to make himself look like the victim, but as he started to speak, people actually laughed. They could see right through him now. His supposedly perfect mask had cracked, revealing the manipulator underneath. I watched as years of careful manipulation unraveled in minutes. James's face cycled through expressions like a kaleidoscope: shock, anger, fear, desperation. The same emotions he'd so carefully cultivated in others were now playing across his own face for everyone to see. But the real punch to his gut was still to come. Have you ever watched someone's entire world collapse in real time? It's both fascinating and terrifying. As James stood there, his carefully constructed facade crumbling, someone in the back of the room started reading his blog posts out loud. Each word seemed to physically hit him like a punch. His eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for allies, but found only shocked and disgusted faces. When they got to the part where he mocked the emotional weakness of his female colleagues, several women from his team stood up and walked out. The CEO's face had turned an interesting shade of red, especially when someone pointed out James's detailed analysis of how he'd manipulated her during meetings. James's breakdown was spectacular. First came the nervous laughter, then the stammering attempts to explain it all away as research and professional development. But when that didn't work, he completely lost it. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Everything I did was to help people, to teach them how relationships really work." The room erupted in laughter, actual, genuine laughter. Someone shouted, "Is that what you call manipulating everyone around you?" Another voice added, "Maybe write a blog post about this moment." That's when James finally broke. His face contorted in a mix of rage and humiliation, and he literally ran from the room, not walked quickly, not made a dignified exit, ran. He knocked over a chair in his rush to escape, nearly tripped over his own feet, and disappeared through the door. The sound of laughter followed him down the hallway. The next day, James sent out a company-wide email apologizing for his unprofessional behavior and inappropriate documentation of workplace interactions. It was clearly written by HR, all corporate speak and careful phrasing. But James couldn't help himself. That same evening, he posted what he probably thought was a scathing response on his blog. The post was titled, "When Sheep Attack: How the Mediocre Destroy Excellence." It was a rambling, bitter manifesto about how weak-minded people couldn't handle his advanced understanding of human psychology. He called me a vindictive ex, though we hadn't actually broken up yet. "Surprise, James, this is me dumping you." He mocked Lily as a jealous colleague who couldn't handle being outshone. He even had the audacity to suggest that his female coworkers who were offended by his posts were proving his points about emotional manipulation. But here's the beautiful part. His desperate attempt at revenge only made things worse for him. Screenshots of his new post spread through the company like wildfire. The CEO, who had been considering letting James resign quietly, saw it within an hour. James was fired, not just asked to leave, but escorted out by security. The best part? His blog, which he thought would be his platform for revenge, became his downfall. Every nasty word he wrote, every attempt to smear his colleagues, just validated everyone's decision to cut him out. His subscribers started dropping off as people realized he wasn't some dating guru. He was just a manipulative guy who'd finally been caught. But James's story wasn't quite over yet. Remember how I mentioned I had one final punch to his gut coming? Well, remember how James always bragged about his backup plans? How he told his blog followers to always have an exit strategy ready? He thought he had one. Through Mark, one learned that James had been secretly recording our private conversations, planning to use them for a tell-all podcast about what really happened. He was convinced this would be his comeback story, his way to spin everything in his favor and rebuild his following. What he didn't know was that while he was busy writing a bitter blog post, I was meeting with his most loyal blog followers. You see, James had created an exclusive inner circle of paying subscribers who got special access to his advanced techniques. These guys had been paying hundreds of dollars a month for James's personal advice and secret strategies. With Mark's help, I got access to James's private coaching sessions, the things he said about these men who trusted him. He called them desperate losers in private messages to Mark, bragging about how easy it was to take their money. He had a whole document ranking them by how pathetically easy they were to manipulate. I reached out to these men individually, sharing screenshots of James mocking them. Some of them had spent thousands of dollars on his coaching. One guy had even gone into debt, following James's advice about investing in your development. James had encouraged this while privately joking about the guy's financial stupidity. The response was immediate and devastating. These men had been James's most devoted followers, his main source of income, and his planned support base for his comeback. Within days, they not only canceled their subscriptions, but began sharing their stories publicly. James's attempts to spin the situation fell apart as his own paying customers exposed how he'd manipulated and mocked them. But I saved the best for last. Remember all those detailed posts James wrote about manipulating me? All those private moments he shared? Well, it turns out that publishing someone's private life without their consent, especially for profit, isn't just morally wrong. It can have serious consequences. My sister Hannah, who'd first discovered the blog, happened to have a close friend who specialized in privacy law. The day after James announced his planned podcast, he received a carefully worded legal letter. Every screenshot, every saved post, every private message where he'd shared details about our relationship, it was all documented. His choice was simple: take down the blog, abandon the podcast idea, and sign an agreement never to publish anything about me again or face legal consequences. James's response? He tried to bluff, claiming he had damaging information about me that he'd release if I pursued legal action. That's when I got to deliver my favorite line of this whole ordeal through my sister's lawyer friend, "Go ahead. Unlike you, I never needed to manipulate anyone to feel powerful." He took down the blog the next day. The last I heard, James had moved back to his hometown, his dreams of being a famous dating guru in shambles. His attempts to start new blogs under different names failed his former followers, made sure to expose him every time. Turns out, hell hath no fury like a bunch of manipulated men scorned. But there's one final twist to this story. Here's the beautiful irony of it all. James, who had built his entire identity around controlling narratives, ended up on someone else's podcast, not as the smooth-talking dating expert he'd imagined, but as the cautionary tale. It happened because one of his former inner circle members had become a pretty successful podcast host, focusing on exposing toxic behavior in the dating advice industry. When he invited James on his show, James actually accepted, thinking this was his chance to spin everything in his favor. Classic James, always believing he could talk his way out of anything. The episode was titled, "Confessions of a Dating Guru, the Man Who Manipulated Everyone." James showed up thinking he could control the narrative, maybe even paint himself as a misunderstood expert who'd made some mistakes. Oh boy, was he wrong. The host had done his homework. He played clips from James's private coaching sessions, read out his mocking messages about his followers, and shared testimonies from people he'd manipulated. With each new revelation, you could hear James's confident facade crumbling. His voice got smaller, his explanations weaker. When the host asked him about specific instances of manipulation, James's responses became a series of stuttered, "I didn't mean it that way," and "you're taking this out of context." But the real gut punch came during the live call-in segment. Former followers, ex-colleagues, and even some of his old college friends called in to share their stories. Each one stripped away another layer of his fake persona. By the end, James was barely speaking above a whisper. Then came a call that broke him completely. His mother's voice came through the speakers, trembling with emotion. She'd been sent the podcast by a friend and had listened to the whole thing. "James," she said, "I don't recognize the person you've become. Your father and I," she had to pause to collect herself, "we raised you better than this." James tried to interrupt, to explain, but his mother wasn't finished. "We've read your blog posts, all of them. The way you talk about women, the way you manipulated that sweet kindergarten teacher, How you took advantage of people who trusted you were shamed, James. Deeply ashamed. The silence that followed was deafening. The host didn't even need to say anything. The sound of James's mother hanging up echoed through the studio. That was 3 months ago. The podcast went viral, of course. James's attempts to rebuild his life kept hitting the same wall. Everyone had heard the episode. Job interviews ended as soon as they Googled his name. Dating apps banned his profiles after women recognized him and reported him. His parents stayed true to their word. They haven't spoken to him since the podcast. Last week, Lily told me she saw James working as a barista 2 towns over, using his middle name on his name tag. When a customer recognized him and started to say something, he just turned around and walked into the back room, leaving his coworker to handle the situation. You know what's funny? All those manipulation techniques he wrote about, all those strategies for controlling people's perceptions, none of them could save him from the simplest thing of all, the truth. As for me, I'm doing great. My kindergartners taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about letting someone face the natural consequences of their actions and watching those consequences unfold from a safe distance, preferably while enjoying a really good cup of coffee. Well, that's just an added bonus.